welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us ahead of the holiday weekend. We promise this one's going to be really quite interesting. And as a reminder, this session is just as much about you and the community that you all have built in coming with us every couple of weeks to this webinar, as much as it is about the content itself. So please hit that chat button. Make sure you choose everyone, or maybe it says all panelists and attendees. I'm really not sure what the heck Zoom shows anymore. Just let us know where you're chatting in from. And as we go through the content, just speak your mind and throw your ideas out there. Let's all learn from one another. Usually the way we get started is Mike takes us through some interesting things we're just sort of seeing in the world. And Mike, I think we have a lot of stuff on today's agenda, so we should probably just go ahead and get started.
Sure.
So what's going on?
Sounds good. Yeah. So, I mean, we talked about cicadas 2 weeks ago, and in that time, it seems like Brood X has emerged from the ground. So I think particularly if you're in like the DC, Baltimore area, I know it's pretty crazy out there. So, you know, because they're emerging, we've seen quite a few restaurants start to put them on menus or start to use them as marketing initiatives. So I think if you click again, you'll see here, this is a chocolate shop out of Bethesda, Maryland called Chouquette Chocolate Shop. And so they actually, you can see the process on the left-hand side here of actually enrobing the cicadas in the chocolate, and then the finished product on the right-hand side there. But so they actually go out, they gather cicadas literally when they come out of the exoskeleton. So they want them directly out of the exoskeleton because that's when they're supposed to be the most delicious. They bring them in, they clean them, they air fry them, they douse them in either cinnamon or Old Bay seasoning, and then they enrobe them in chocolate, and they sell them for, I think it's like $22 for a dozen chocolate covered cicadas. And they've been inundated. If you see there, you know, viral cicada update, they're actually not selling them for delivery anymore. They're having to limit the orders because they've been so popular.
Any idea what this tastes like?
So, I mean, they said somebody had a review online and they said it doesn't taste a lot like anything. It just kind of tastes like chocolate with maybe a little bit of crunchiness to it.
So, I guess for any of you that are out in the DC area or any place where the brood has emerged, can you just let us know in comments what it's like? Is it super loud? Do you see them everywhere? And these places, they literally just scoop them up by hand. They just harvest them off the street, essentially.
I think for these, they actually try to get them when they're like on a tree and just emerging, and then they pluck them. That's actually been one of the hardest things, like when we were researching this, is actually getting the cicadas.
There was a great Freakonomics podcast episode from this January featuring Dr. Rosin, who we've had on a couple of times on the topic of disgust, and he's the leading expert in the world on disgust as a psychological phenomenon. And they had on a few other people too. And one of the things they talked about is you could take something like bugs and cover them in chocolate and people will eat them. And it looks like that absolutely holds. I would say though, $22 for 12 pieces seems sort of expensive, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why, because they're really hard to gather, actually. Because you want them like...
There's no food cost if you're just going to scoop them on the sidewalk.
Just the chocolate, yeah. But you want them at that like perfect time, like, you know, like right when they come out of their exoskeleton, they say. So that's the hard part of it.
All right, this is a good segue.
So this is, they're actually not selling cicadas on the pizzas, but this is a operator called Snappy Tomato Pizza out of Kentucky. I think they have about 70 locations throughout the Midwest. But so they're using cicadas as a marketing initiative. They've actually partnered with the local hospital. And so they want to celebrate all the creatures being born this year. So that includes babies or cicadas or whatever it may be. So if there's a baby being born at the local hospital, they get this free cicada onesie, and then the parents get a coupon for a free pizza. And then, I mean, this has been huge, like it's been all over the news here. But then they also are doing this a social media contest where if you put together a video of how annoyed you are by cicadas, you could win a pizza too. So just kind of using cicadas as a marketing initiative.
Is there does anyone in comments know, is there anything, you know, that's, you know, bad for the world if we just sort of, you know, basically kill or eat all these cicadas? Should we let them just be, or are we damaging like the ecosystem by disrupting and just starting to eat all these things? I don't know.
I'm sure they play some role.
Yeah, that came up in some of the articles. They said the numbers are so huge that there's almost no way that we could, especially humans. I mean, like other animals are eating way more cicadas than humans.
Is the number in the trillions or something, or the high billions?
I read billions, but I don't know what that means. If it's just in the U.S. or just in particular states.
Okay.
And then this is a great article from the New York Times. So this is a chef called Bun Lai. He has a restaurant in New Haven, Connecticut, where he's actually taking cicadas and doing some fine dining dishes with it. This is actually a sashimi dish where he uses cicadas. He likens them to soft shell crab, where you get that crunchy outside, but then kind of that soft inside. He's doing a bunch of different dishes. There's this sashimi here. He actually puts them on a string and then smokes them over a fire, so you get that smoky cicada taste. And in that article, there's a bunch of different chefs that are talking about their uses throughout the world and different cultures that eat cicadas. I know Chef Sean Sherman, who was at our Foodscape event a couple of years ago. He's opening his restaurant in Minneapolis next month, and he's looking at putting them on the menu because they're part of indigenous cuisines. And it's not because, even because they're, a great protein source or they're so plentiful. It's because, for a lot of cultures, they are delicious. They're crunchy, they have a lot of protein, and they consider them really tasty.
So he's calling this sashimi?
This is, I think there's a sashimi, it looks like fish there, and then he's got the crunchy cicadas on top, and then it looks like he's gonna roll it up.
Oh, that's sashimi underneath, and he uses cicadas as a texture or something.
Exactly, yeah.
How long are the cicadas going to be out for? Like, how long is this going to be a thing?
That's a good question. I think it's all related to temperature, so a couple months, I guess.
Okay. There's your seasonal LTO, I guess.
Yeah. And then, this is related to what we were just talking about. Are you vaccinated when you go to a restaurant, talking to your server if you're vaccinated? So the Alinea group here in Chicago, which manages both Alinea and a bunch of restaurants here in the city, they were trying to figure out what they were going to do about their servers, if they were going to require vaccination. And instead, they came up with the idea of vaccinated servers will have a little pin that they can wear. So it actually looks like that black pin on the screen there. And if you have that pin on, it means as a server, you don't have to wear a mask anymore. So it's basically exactly what Mark said. Like, I've been to a few restaurants where, like, you're kind of playing that game. Like, can I take my mask off? Do I put it on every single time the server comes? And then finally you get to the point where you just tell the server, like, I'm vaccinated, and the server says they're vaccinated. So I don't know. I feel like this is actually a good way of doing it. So
I'm surprised, or maybe they have already, that Alinea hasn't, knowing what they do, hasn't done like a vaccine-based themed dish or something. It's only this stuff in syringes. Anyways, that seems like obvious.
They sous vide something and put it in a syringe, and you just inject it, you eat it.
Yeah, inject it.
And then this, I'm surprised I didn't see this already. Some people might have seen this. So this is basically, Polaroid came out with this 3D printable candy pen. So it's basically like any of those 3D pen printers, but this one is specifically for candy. So for $50, you get the pen, and then you get one set of cartridges, which are candy. I think the flavors are strawberry, orange, apple, grape, lemon, or cola. And then on the next screen here, you can see what you can do on it with this pen, which is basically 3D print whatever candy that you want. So, this is a little house that you can 3D print. They had pictures on their website of flowers. pretty much anything that you can imagine. But it's one of the first consumer-driven products at kind of this lower price point for 3D printing geared towards food.
So what do you mean by 3D print? How does this actually work? You're not just squeezing it out of a syringe or something. What is it doing?
I guess the easiest kind of analog would be if you've ever used a hot glue gun, where you're actually kind of, putting, like in this case, it's candy, but you're actually kind of forming strings and layers and layers and layers of strings that get hot and then come out of the pen, and then that builds up into a 3D creation.
But you're actually doing that yourself, like you said, a hot glue gun. Is that, I guess that's 3D printing, sort of?
That's 3D, yeah. That option right there.
It's really just a sort of like a hot candy dispenser.
Yeah.
Like a fancy piping bag.
Yeah. I mean, you could kind of see them in the house there, like on the wall there, you could see the little lines that the 3D printer has created.
But it takes actual artistic talent by the person to make something like this. It's not like you press a button and it does this for you.
Yeah, yes. And I think the packages themselves come with guides and
Oh, they do.
actual
Okay,
pictures and
cool.
stuff. Yeah. And it's for 14 and up. It's not for like little kids. And then this, I wish there was a video of this because I think that would be the best way of showing it. But so this is, it's a new type of protein bar, and they actually use sound to form the protein bars. So if you've ever seen those videos where they put sand on a table and then they use sound frequencies to create patterns in the sand, they basically do the same thing here, but it creates a protein bar at the end. So you can actually see the example there. The raw product is in the little glass, container there, and then they use sound frequencies, and those sound frequencies actually create that little tablet that you see right in front of it. And so because of that, they don't have to use any heat at all. So they say that it actually keeps a lot of the vitamins and minerals intact. And then they don't use any binders at all. So they don't use any, type of molasses or oils or anything to bind it together. It's all sound that forms them.
Boy, so sound is holding it together?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it happens and that's what I'm saying. I wish there was a video of it. But they say it happens in seconds. They just take that raw material, kind of beam the sound at it, and then it forms into that little tablet.
So what if you're playing the wrong music? Does it just fall apart at some point?
I mean, once it's together,
that powder and just scream at it.
Does it just disintegrate into ash in your mouth, or?
Yeah, it was so. I mean, once it's together, it's together. But they do say that it has a really buttery texture that you're not going to get from other ways of creating things.
And you could buy this now?
Yeah, it's actually on their website available.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool.
Yeah. And they've raised a ton of money. I want to say they raised like $600 million or something like that.
What?
Yeah, it's a crazy amount of money.
All right, there's too much venture capital right now.
And then this is, I mean, I don't know if there's, kind of any indicator that things are getting back to normal, then buffets are coming back. This is, we actually talked about the Bacchanal buffet at Caesar's Palace early on in the pandemic. So they closed down, obviously, and during that time, they spent $2.4 million to upgrade it, and it just opened again this week. And one, I think they absolutely did a great job. Two, I think it shows how you can do a buffet, as things get back to normal, because they both have the, traditional buffet options, huge overflowing, plates of Alaskan sea crab and things like that. But then they've also really gone all in on plated dishes. So, if you feel safer having a plated meal, you can get a bunch of plated dishes. They actually have dim sum carts that roam around the buffet, so you can choose dishes from the dim sum cart. So whatever makes you feel safest at the buffet. And the options that they put on the buffet are also kind of a great just overview of a bunch of the trends that we've been talking about for years and years. I'm going to read some of the things that they have. So they've added a huge Korean food section, has things like kalbi short ribs, japchae, banchan, plus a larger Thai, Vietnamese, Laotian, Filipino cuisine section. There are 100 gluten-free, vegan, and vegetarian items, all with QR codes. There's a mezze station with options like baba ganoush. They replaced New York style pizza with Roman style pizzas. Italian section went way more Mediterranean with options like shakshuka. The elote has really over the top flavors like crushed up Takis and flamin' hot Cheetos. They have ube cupcakes. They have Vietnamese coffee. And then you can see on the next screen here, this is their wood-fired station, which is also just, is a great example of something that would really attract people to food service. This is the type of thing that people are not going to get through delivery. They're not going to have at home. But this is their wood-fired grill that has like a whole suckling pig, prime rib, Argentinian rotating grill, chipotle grilled cherry quail, just all kinds of options.
So it's definitely not the plant-based station.
No, this is not the plant-based station. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of peppers on there.
Yeah, I lived in Vegas for a number of years. That Bacchanal buffet is amazing. It was awesome, before they did this remodel, and this is even more incredible. They used to do this thing there. If one buffet wasn't enough for you, they called it the buffet of buffets, where you'd buy an all-you-can-eat pass to multiple buffets. Usually didn't feel, and that was like a weekend-long thing. Imagine just eating buffet meal for every single meal.
Oh my gosh.
for the entire weekend, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I was there a
They do
couple of years ago.
really.
The lines were insane.
Well, that's the question, right? So the issue with these buffets where they're so popular that sometimes there's like a 2-hour wait in a very, very dense line. Do we know if they're finding ways around that? How do you space out a line, or do they not care about that anymore?
Yeah,
Vegas
that's
seems
a
like
good
it's
question.
pretty much close to fully open at this point. So
yeah, well, I mean, I know the pictures of when they opened the buffet, the lines were long this week. So
yeah, so if you're willing to wait in that line, I can't imagine you feeling unsafe going up to get food, right?
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
very weird.
Probably if you're at a casino in Vegas, that's a little bit of a self-selecting crowd too.
Yeah. What's this?
And this, so people might have seen this before, which is a third thumb. So it's again 3D printed third thumb that attaches to your traditional hand. So it just adds another, appendage for you to use. But so this has been out for a couple of years now, but now they've had a chance to study it and see how people use it. So some new research came out to see, whether people actually use this like it's another appendage on their hand, or if it's really difficult to use. And they said it's actually really remarkable how quickly the human body just kind of starts using it as if it's part of their normal hand. They were doing things like testing whether people could pick up balls. I think the most interesting thing was whether they could pick up wine glasses and pick up more wine glasses. And they said it was actually really easy for people to start using. So it kind of has implications for back of house or servers. If you think of, picking up wine glasses in the future, maybe we're going to have extra, 3D printed appendages in the future.
How does this actually work? You flex your hand in some way and it makes the thumb go in and out? What is it?
That's the idea. In the future, they would like to get to that point. Right now, it's a sensor under your foot that you use, so you can put it in your shoe or something.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Cool.
Yep.
Well, fantastic. Thanks, Mike. And you'll stick around with us and add your thoughts as we go. Before we get into some of the more hard data stuff, we asked this question a while back, and I wonder if the answers have changed very much. Just for all of you, what do you think the future of office work looks like for you? So in the year 2022, which is actually not that far away, how many days per week do you expect to be in the office on average? I think the last time we looked at this, most people said it's probably going to be maybe 2 days a week or something. But I'm curious to see if this attitude has changed. Mark, Mike, what does your preferred work life look like?
I would love to get to 3 days a week in the office, and then work from home Monday, Friday.
Yeah,
I'm good 1 day a week.
Yeah. Would having a really amazing office move you on that to more, or do you feel like it's just come in for the occasional meeting when needed?
I mean, I kind of want to set up a kind of close to half and half, home and away kind of routine. What I really just want most is to establish a routine again.
Yeah, I think we could all use that. So let's see what people say. So about almost 30% say, hey, I'm going to work entirely remotely. And then you only have only 13% saying full-time back in the office. About a little less than half say it's going to be 2 or 3 days. So I think that is probably fairly accurate based on some other polling that we've done with people as a whole too. And it makes you wonder, all those areas that have nothing but tall office buildings, what's going to happen to those places in the long run? Is it going to be converting commercial real estate into residential? Is it going to be that the restaurants that are there that serve a lunchtime crowd, our current office is in the Chicago Loop, do those restaurants just sort of stay closed or get converted into something else in the long run? We're going to see some changes for sure. All right, Mark, I thought you could maybe help take us through some of the things that we've learned about people's attitudes around COVID and how that's been changing over the last couple of weeks, and specifically since the updated CDC guidance, which was, I think, May 13th.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we seeing?
Well, I think that we're starting to see, a definite shift down where we're going to be permanently working from, this level of lessened concern about contracting coronavirus. The way that we ask this question is how concerned are people personally about contracting the virus themselves? And this was always pretty, I think, responsive to events in the news. And as things would, flare up in the country, we had a couple of surges or a couple of kind of high profile, events around it. And so that would drive the concern, spiking back up in some places. But I think now we're starting to kind of slowly descend below 50%. We're getting to the levels that we were kind of right at the start of the pandemic.
Yeah. And if you look at where people are most, and I guess least concerned, does this surprise you much at all? I mean, I think we all know instinctively, and we've seen this from previous data, that concern is higher in urban areas, less so in rural areas. What's going on with the Midwest over there? Why are Midwesterners less concerned?
Well, just because we're hardier people, Jack.
There you go. Okay. You all know.
I don't know. I think that certainly, the virus had been bad to begin with, and at parts on the coasts, New York and California. But the Midwest hasn't been without its kind of troubling spots. I mean, more recently, Michigan was, had kind of a surge going on. So I can't really explain it either.
It's actually interesting that the difference between the Midwest and other parts of the country is even more extreme than rural versus urban areas, right? Which we found sort of surprising. And if you look at the percentage of folks who say they're very concerned personally about COVID, that same metric we just looked at, based on people's vaccination status, I thought this was sort of interesting too. Mark, what insights can we glean from these numbers?
Well, I mean, I think that the risk is there for people that want to get their vaccination but haven't yet. I think that they are kind of still the most concerned about not getting their kind of immunity in time. And then the folks there at the bottom, the vaccine rejectors, this has been kind of their MO really throughout the whole time. It's not quite as low as less than 1 in 4, but consistently they have been the least concerned since we started tracking vaccination hesitancy.
Yeah, they were never much concerned in the first place. And the people that say I'm not sure if I want to, they're sort of somewhere in between. What does this mean for whether people are willing to go out to eat or if they're avoiding eating out? Overall, I think this is a very positive development, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, and it was 2 weeks ago when we were talking about this, where kind of finally this number had inverted, where the folks that were avoiding restaurants were in the kind of bare minority, where now the most responses as we get to this question are people saying they don't have any concerns dining out. And I think that this had been kind of a number that was pretty consistent throughout this whole crisis. There weren't too many major spikes, but we just had a pretty big decrease.
Yeah, and if you sort of separate that number out into people that say that they're definitely avoiding eating out, that they're just sort of nervous about it, or that they have no issues whatsoever, how does this break, this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 break look like compared to where we were a couple of months ago?
Well, I mean, a couple of months ago, we were probably always going to be between 40 and 50% of people definitely avoid eating out. The avoidant behavior really was hanging on for quite a while, even when it looked like beginning in like February, when we really got momentum with vaccinations. It was kind of a lagging indicator. People still weren't quite ready to kind of return to some of that normal behavior, but that's accelerated now.
Yeah, and if you look at the folks that say I have like no issues eating out whatsoever, it's interesting that whether you're already vaccinated or plan to get vaccinated, or you're not really sure if you can get vaccinated, that doesn't really move the number very much. It's just the folks that say, nah, I don't plan to do this, that are really divergent from the rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see that too with their attitudes on masks.
And they never had an issue eating out for the most part, anyways. And, you know, I think you've seen too from the data of this other point that we've been tracking about, do you think this is more of a health crisis or more of an economic crisis? This seemed pretty significant too, Mark, that we finally crossed over, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, throughout this whole time, you know, if we had to make a choice in this binary of, you know, is this a public health crisis or is this an economic one? You know, our public health crisis numbers were winning out consistently, but you know, I think this is some evidence that some corner has been turned, where I think that a high enough number of people kind of think that we have the virus on the run, to the point where now it's time to maybe start thinking about, you know, the after effects economically about all this, and how we start really, you know, solving for those and accounting for those.
Yeah, it's an interesting chart. I mean, a few times we got pretty close to 50-50, not quite there, but we finally have a slight majority saying it's more about the economic crisis, that the economic conditions that we're facing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So can we talk about, and we talked about this a little bit in the run up to the start of today's webinar, but just like what's going on with like masking and attitudes. I mean, just by sheer coincidence, we talked about mask attitudes a little bit last time, which was 2 weeks ago. And then literally, I think an hour, maybe 2 hours after this webinar, the CDC dropped its updated guidance about not having to wear a mask if you're vaccinated. Let's take a look at how this is sort of manifesting in people's attitudes and behaviors. So we're looking at brand new data now that has been fielded since the updated CDC guidance, and you know, we made sure respondents all knew that guidance had been issued. So in light of that guidance, what are people doing and thinking, right? CDC says fully vaccinated Americans no longer need masks either indoor or outdoors in many cases, which is fairly stunning given that it wasn't that long ago that we were saying that they were still required outdoors. We jumped straight to the don't need them indoors type of a thing. But if you read that headline, that subheadline, the relaxation of restrictions incentivizes people to get the shots and help pave the way for a full reopening of society. So I think that this is what the idea was, that if we say, hey, you don't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated, this would be an incentive to actually get vaccinated. And we could look at the extent to which this actually bore out, right? So it's sort of like, hey, here's the carrot for you. Get vaccinated, and that carrot will be yours. I don't know if it actually worked out that way, though, right? I mean, the carrot on a string thing works in one context, but not so much if anyone can just have a bowl of carrots whenever they want. And I wonder if that's not what's actually already happened. So if we talk to just the vaccine hesitant people that say, hey, you know, I'm not sure if I'm going to get the vaccine, or I know that I'm not going to get the vaccine. So just those group of the vaccine hesitant, we ask, hey, does this announcement make you any more likely to want to get vaccinated? Only 18% of that population said yes. The vast majority, 82%, say no, not really. But you could argue, hey, that's still some bit of a lift, right? You took some portion of the people that said I wasn't sure about getting vaccinated, and you made them more likely to want to get vaccinated. So that sounds like it's a positive. But you have to then ask, is there some countervailing force in the other direction for the other big chunk of the population that was thinking about getting vaccinated and was planning on doing it, but hadn't done it yet? So we could actually compare and know that there is some statistical margin of error to these numbers, just as there are with anything that's based on a poll, of maybe 2 to 3% in each case. But here are what the numbers look like from April a few weeks ago versus after the CDC announcement. And these are self-reported numbers. The percentage of people who are actually vaccinated today is going to be a little bit higher than what we see in the May 20th data, because that number keeps going up. But just look at the numbers, right? So April 28th, you had 31% of the population self-identifying as vaccine hesitant, meaning that they weren't sure if they're going to get vaccinated, or that they just did not plan to get vaccinated. By the time we get to May 20th, that number jumped from 31 to 35% due largely to a decrease in the percentage of people that say, I plan to get vaccinated. Now, again, these are pretty small changes, and they may even fall within some margin of error. So you can't say with absolute certainty you've actually had an increase in vaccine hesitancy because the move isn't that big. But we don't see a move in the direction that I think was intended, or at least stated to be the intent of the announcement. You don't see a drop from 31 to 20, for instance.
Right.
So we'll see if the incentives play out the way as they were stated, or if there are other forces at work potentially. So I think we've all seen in the news too, there's probably been a little bit of confusion around all this as well. So first it's, hey, this should be a really good incentive to get vaccinated, fantastic. Then all of a sudden it's like, the public is misinterpreting what our actual guidance means. Maybe it's not being read correctly. What does the new mask guidance actually mean? And you've seen tons of headlines about how this was maybe very, very confusing for many local governments and people and consumers as a whole, right? All unvaccinated guests must wear a mask. Thank you for understanding. You've probably seen this show up in certain restaurants and whatnot. I got to ask you, Mark, Mike, do you think that this sort of rule is being followed?
No, not 100%.
Yeah, and do you think most people think this rule is being followed?
No.
So it brings up a really interesting situation. It's almost sort of like a game theory type of a thing. Imagine that you are a very concerned person around safety. You want to make sure you're doing everything you can to be as safe as possible. It's just something you really, really care about. So your strategy is to stay safe. Prior to the updated CDC guidance, when masks were sort of required for everyone, the odds of you encountering, relatively speaking, an unmasked person, inside of a restaurant or someplace else was probably relatively low compared to today. And then you could sort of say, well, my strategy for those unmasked encounters is to just, avoid that person, right? If I want to be extra safe, that was some agency that you had in that decision. After this, right, after the updated guidance, now you're going to have way more encounters with unmasked people, and your strategy in those encounters now is, I'm actually not sure what I should do. You could say avoid, but that would be avoiding basically everybody at this point. So it may have made things a little bit more confusing for people that wanted to be extra safe, but perhaps it doesn't matter because this is just going to move everyone in a normalized state of mind where no one is really paying attention to this anymore. So for the people that didn't really care much about masks in the first place, no big deal, and maybe even hurrah. For the people that were really trying to stay safe, might have made things a little bit more confusing. I mean, have you guys had like that experience when we went into a crowded place where before, not so long ago, people were wearing masks and now they're not, and you're like, I don't really understand what's going on. I've sort of had
I definitely felt that way. And I think that our strategy was just sort of we tried as best we could to still kind of maintain our distance. I think we took our masks off, but I definitely gave a wide berth to a lot of people as I was trying to move through the crowd to get to the bathroom.
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon. Okay, so if we look at the percentage of folks that are vaccine hesitant, and we define these as people that say, I either don't plan to get the vaccine or I'm not sure if I'm going to get the vaccine. The largest population is among Gen Zers and in rural areas, and in the least vaccine hesitant are basically people in urban areas. I think we know this instinctively, right? But the numbers certainly bear this out as well. And I don't know if you're going to see these numbers drop very much over time, right? Because we've been locked in the 30s for a while around the percentage of people that say they were vaccine hesitant. And even after the updated guidance, that number is still in the mid 30s today. So I think these patterns will hold probably for quite some time. And Mark, why are people vaccine hesitant?
It's funny, you look at maybe those top 4 reasons there, and they all kind of, I think, they interplay with each other a little bit, where certainly the kind of the most common reason for people to be vaccine hesitant is this worry about side effects. And I think that's not exclusive to the COVID vaccine. I think that that might be a reason why a lot of consumers are, not necessarily going to get vaccinated for anything. But then there are also these kind of ideas that, the vaccines were developed very, very quickly, and they were developed also kind of in, a very kind of highly politicized environment. It's not like our politicians were, necessarily behind the science, but they did kind of have something to do with each other. But I was interested actually to see, those people that said that they're already doing their part by, taking these kind of precautionary behaviors. What do I need to get vaccinated for if I wear my mask and I keep my distance? So those are those big reasons that really kind of all touch on each other a little bit, I thought.
Yeah. So I'd say there's, like you said, there's four that really rise to the top here. The politicization thing is certainly perceived to be real, but it trails by a wide margin number one, which is a concern over side effects. So there is like that personal safety element to this, and maybe something helps disprove this to people that feel this way. Maybe something doesn't. I don't know, but there really are just those four things, and everything else is really, really much smaller. What's interesting
among the folks that did get vaccinated, we all kind of admit having side effects, right? I mean, my second shot really knocked me out for 24 hours.
Yeah, and look, I think media transparency is a real concern. I mean, it seems like not everything is as unbiased as we would like it to be, and it shows in the numbers, and it shows specifically among those who don't plan to get vaccinated. So if you look at the vaccine hesitant and you break it out by people that aren't sure what they're going to do versus those that just say nope, you have a pretty big difference in that perception of science having been too politicized, right? The people that just say no, that's like a third of them versus just 1 in 6 among the not sures. Anything else you would observe here, Mark?
The one that makes sense to me is again, I went back to those folks that are still kind of showing precautionary behavior. So among the folks that are not sure, it's just a matter of, well, is the vaccine totally necessary if I'm not entirely sure about what I get with it? So, at the very least, I was heartened to see that folks that may not necessarily get their shot, they still kind of see the value in wearing a mask, practicing the social distance.
Well, and people do see the value in some of the incentives we talked about in previous webinars, right? Whether it's a discount or a free meal or a chance to win the lottery. Was that Ohio that did the lottery thing? It was like super successful.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely had a positive effect in Ohio, and I think that New York and others are copying it.
So similar train of thought. How long should restaurant and retail workers continue to wear masks? About 30% say you could stop now. About 22% say, give it another 3 months. About another 21% say end of this year. And then you have some folks that say it's going to be longer than that. About 19% say it should be indefinite. This is something that I think about. I'm like, if people feel they're safe, we actually see in the data that even if you feel like you can stop wearing a mask now, or you don't have a mask favorable attitude, a lot of those folks still want the restaurant and retail workers to wear a mask, right? So there is some strange dynamic happening over there, and you probably have to stay on the safe side of things if you're a restaurant or a retail place. Like if you take the mask off, that may freak a lot of people out, even though they've learned themselves that it's okay to be unmasked if you're vaccinated. There could be like a psychological phenomenon going on with there as well.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing though, because I think that a lot of restaurant companies have been very vocal about giving their employees time off to go get that taken care of, and it doesn't necessarily translate into trust right away from your customers.
Yeah, and if you look, I mean, you both just said it. You said, I asked, do you think that people are following those rules? And you said, no, I don't really think that's happening all the time. So if you think that about the general public, isn't some of that thinking going to leak into how you perceive, anyone you meet in public, including those that are working at a place? Right. So I don't know if everyone's doing that full mental processing, saying, well, this is a restaurant. I'm sure they have regulations, and I'm sure everyone gets tested. They might just be like, yeah, if someone's not wearing a mask, I don't know if it really means anything anymore. So again, we would generally recommend stick on the side of the cautious. You may freak out some customers otherwise. So if you're getting out to eat at a restaurant, what concerns you more? Is it risk of exposure from your server or risk from exposure from other patrons? This is actually really interesting because for a long time, in the very early stages of the pandemic, it was like 50-50. As we got into month 2 and month 3, it became, I forget what the numbers were, like, I don't know, like 80-20 or something like that, where people were much more concerned about other people, other customers, than they were the people that worked there. We're back to like a 50-50 again right now. And there's probably multiple ways to interpret this. On the one hand, you could say, well, the server number is up, so we got to be extra careful with how our servers are perceived. Or it could just be that concern overall has tamped down to the point where no one is like seeing red alert when they bump into someone, another customer inside the store. But both are equally important, but the importance overall is less so than it used to be. I don't know if Mark, if you had any other thoughts or comments.
Now, just to say that I was surprised that the other patrons number there was so relatively low. I still would have thought that we are far more, untrusting of kind of other people than someone who, elects to work that job and serve you.
Yeah, it really surprised me that it dropped to 50-50 that fast.
Yeah, me too.
So I thought this was actually really interesting too. Who do people think that masks most help? Is it the person wearing it? Is it to protect the other people? Or is it just that masks don't serve a purpose? So among the general public, it's a pretty even split between the person wearing it and protecting others. And then you had about 14% saying masks don't do much. What was interesting is we looked at vaccine rejectors, not just vaccine hesitant, but full-blown vaccine rejectors that say, I don't plan on getting it. And I would have sort of thought that the masks don't serve a purpose number would have been really, really high in that group. And it is higher, but it's still not a majority, right? 51% of even vaccine rejectors think that the mask is going to either protect the person wearing it or the people around them. Which sort of tells me, and I think we saw this from the vaccine hesitancy information, that it's not just a full-blown rejection of, hey, COVID's not dangerous or anything like that. Some of those other concerns around, maybe there's a side effect or something really is driving a lot of that hesitancy. Now, if we'd seen here that, 99% say masks don't serve a purpose, that would probably give you a very different implication. But here, about half, or even a very tiny majority, think that vaccine rejectors think that masks actually do something. And if you look at the same number, the same stats, but you break it out by consumer generations, sort of interesting, right? Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers, they're all sort of similar, but boomers are much more likely to think that masks are all about protecting others. This could be because there's so many more vaccinated boomers at this point, either they're looking at this from their perspective. That is one generational difference that we see. Can you tell us, Mark, about what we're seeing with places that people think are safe or not safe to go to?
Yeah, these numbers that we're looking at here are the number of people that think it's too risky to go out to any one of these kinds of venues here. And, it is still the case that the more kind of crowded a place is supposed to be, or in the case of like buffet restaurants or salad bars, kind of the more, food stations are kind of open and self-service, that does carry a higher perception of risk right now. But one thing that I do want to note here is that these numbers that we're seeing right here are well below the peak that we had just 4 months ago. So, back in January of 2021, we were seeing that, like the figure for nightclubs, I think 3 and 4 people were saying it's too risky to go out in a crowd like that. What these numbers are, they're basically just fallen a little bit below the numbers that we saw last June. So if you think about where we were last June, we were basically kind of starting this this period of the pandemic where that second surge of the summer hadn't happened yet. We basically just kind of missed this deadline to reopen by Easter, by May, where we sort of thought that it would be kind of over by then. And so that was kind of this idea of, okay, well, now we have to really hunker down for a much longer term crisis. And so the numbers here kind of reflect that time. They're just slightly under those levels, pretty much across the board.
So would you say these are the most optimistic numbers we've seen for many months now?
Yeah. I mean, and certainly when you look at it in comparison to where we were at the turn of the year, it was just, that was that really kind of weird interregnum period where, vaccines were about to roll out beyond healthcare workers. So there was optimism there, but nobody knew how long it would take for them to be, safe.
Yeah. And not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to do it anyways. Do you remember if any of the rank orders shifted much, or is this pretty much similar to what we've seen in the past?
Rank order really hasn't shifted around that much. I mean, you look at the pure food service kind of options down at the bottom there of restaurant delivery and takeout. Those have always been perceived kind of as the most relatively safe. So no rank order change really.
And what can restaurants do to make you feel safer while eating there? I think this is all pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past, but again, this is brand new, updated in just the last week. Anything to call out here, Mark?
The same dynamic is at play, where rank orders can be the same. The things that we want to see restaurants doing have been pretty consistent from last March to now, and so over the 16 months, we're asking for kind of the same things, and that's even knowing that COVID is not really surface transmitted. We still want to see a lot of overt sanitation happening. But again, these numbers are, well down from the peak, this past January. They're more consistent with actually numbers from late last March. So kind of very, very early pandemic, when we were all, we had a lot less information back then than we have now. But I think we're a little slow to kind of go well below those levels of concern. So I think this just kind of says, shows us how long-term some of these behaviors are going to be. I think we'll increase our visitation back to restaurants, but I think that we are going to want to see it. We want to see a lot more safety being taken, a lot more precaution being taken.
Yeah, and one of the things we saw pretty early on was that historically, if you ask people what matters to them when they're picking a restaurant, it's convenience and taste and a few other things, and price, of course. Here we saw in the early days of the pandemic, cleanliness shot up to the #1 spot. As of last week, cleanliness is actually still in the #1 spot, and I think we've said all along that cleanliness is going to matter more than ever in perpetuity, regardless of where the pandemic goes. And it looks like that certainly is playing out.
Yep, it would seem so.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some other issues. One, this is a big one. We've all seen the headlines around labor shortages. I blocked out the names here. Here's a restaurant near me, now hiring line cooks, starting pay $16 an hour, and they can't get any applicants. And they used to serve lunch and dinner. They said they can't even open for lunch anymore. So they're down to 1 day part from what used to be 2. And if you think about sort of supply and demand, I thought actually, if you look at what's happening with pricing for rideshare, that's the most flexible pricing you can have, because you can have real-time surge pricing that measures supply and demand. I was in Chicago, I think it was last week. It took me an hour to get an Uber at the airport, and it cost $75 from O'Hare to downtown, which was usually, I think, like a $25 or maybe $30 trip. It just got much more expensive because you had far fewer drivers, and you had actually fewer taxi drivers as well. So a lot of demand, and the impact of, relatively speaking, not enough drivers to go around, and you see lots of headlines around this too. People paying 3-4 times what they used to for a ride right now. And the question is, how does this manifest? Maybe not with surge pricing, but are we seeing things with labor shortages that are recognizable by consumers at restaurants? So over the past month, have you noticed businesses or workplaces struggling with serving their customers because of the lack of staff or employees? And not just that you see that there's fewer people working there, but that they're actually struggling to keep up with their customers in some way. And here, over half, 54% of consumers said, yes, I've actually noticed this at restaurants in some way. And restaurants leads every other type of venue in this metric. And if you ask people, well, why do you think some restaurants or other food service places are having trouble finding and hiring enough employees at this stage of the pandemic? The number one response given by people as a whole, so maybe they're right, maybe they're not right, but this is what people think, is it's about the enhanced UI that's creating a disincentive to find work. The number two response, which is not too far from the top, is that just wages overall are not high enough to attract employees. And there's certainly a movement right now that asks, hey, have our expectations of what a fair wage is, has that been reset by the pandemic? And then also, some people just don't want public-facing service jobs that risk exposing them to COVID. But it's a number of factors, but it is worth noting that about half think that enhanced UI at least has something to do with it. And we're seeing now that a number of states are looking to drop enhanced UI. So this is almost like a red state, blue state map based on who the governor is. It's pretty darn close, maybe not exactly, but actually it might even be exactly, but it's very, very close at a minimum. So these are some of the states that are looking to end the current $300 a week enhanced unemployment benefits. I think originally these are set to run through September, and these states are looking to end them earlier in July. So I would actually want to ask all of us a really quick poll question. Do you believe that places that end, or states that end unenhanced employment benefits, will that lead to a significant improvement with the current labor shortage, or will it not have a significant impact? This is one of those things where, we've had a couple of really interesting scientific tests during COVID where you almost have like some states or places that are control groups and others are experimental that do a different policy. You can actually see what happened. We looked at the impact of that with lifting the mask mandate in Texas, for instance, and we made a guess, and then we saw how our guest did. So we're going to make a guess here, and I guess in a couple of months we could see how our guest does as well. So we got a lot of people voting already. Here's our results. 71% of us think that ending UI will lead to a significant improvement in the labor shortage. I guess I have nothing else to say about that other than I guess we will see in a couple months what actually happens.
Yeah, but that's not occurring in a vacuum either, right? I mean,
there's other things for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm interested to see what happens starting in July when the child tax credit allowance starts showing up in people's direct deposits.
But you do have somewhat of a control versus experiment group because all those other things are happening in all those other states, and you can look at just the states that are ending early versus those that are not.
Oh, sure.
And a difference there, but we'll see. We'll see. So we asked people, what would you be willing to accept amidst a restaurant labor shortage? 40% say I'd take slightly higher menu prices. Half said I would be willing to accept some self-service technology. And that to us is really the big story over here, right? I mean, it's everything from the kiosks we've all seen over the past few years to the fact that stuff that you do on your phone is basically use of self-service technology too, which may have been a person previously. And we even saw in some of the earlier work that we've done where a lot of people, including Gen Zers, millennials, and some extent Gen Xers, even prefer getting menu recommendations or suggestions via artificial intelligence or a recommender algorithm rather than from a human being. Boomers are different in that regard. So we see a lot of acceptance of technology overall, and you start seeing a lot of robotics out there. Here's that, Sally the salad robot, which has, I think, been purchased. That company's been purchased by DoorDash. It's been around for a while and it's been growing. You have, I think Flippy from Miso Robotics. I think this is a White Castle execution of a robotic arm that in this case manages stuff that goes into the fryer for them, and I think has been successfully trialed in a number of stores already. Consumers are increasingly open to all of these types of things, right? And the question is, where are you going to see it roll out first? If you have, let's say, high labor prices right now, and automation is something consumers are willing to accept, and automation ends up being cheaper than people, what's going to happen, right? Places are going to start to automate. And where is that going to happen first? It's probably going to happen at chain restaurants first that actually have the capital to make those investments into those automation, robots and software platforms and whatnot, or have at least the bargaining power to get a much better deal or price on these types of things. So this could be a case where you see continued accelerated waves of automation, most first at chain restaurants. And then you have to ask, does that give chain restaurants an additional competitive advantage over independents that can't afford the capital outlay to invest in this type of automation, right? They're relying more on humans doing stuff. And what does that actually mean for the dining experience? Does it mean that, service is going to be, of an even greater different style at independents versus chains, for instance? Does it mean that, chains may, independents may rely more on perhaps even some prepared products that don't require as many humans to actually cook back of house? Potentially, if you're a prepared food manufacturer, you may want to start thinking about these things. Real quickly, this is what people say they'd be willing to tolerate in terms of menu premiums to make sure that restaurants have an appropriate level of staff. If they have to spend more on labor and talent. Almost 80% say that they accept a premium of at least 5%, but only 1/3 of consumers say they'd accept a menu premium of 10% or more. So if you're in that 5 to 10% range and you can work that into your pricing, great. But once you go past 10%, you're going to start losing people, it seems like. And then the final thing, and we're going to just speed through this real quickly. There's been lots of conversation around inflation over the past few weeks or a few months, actually. And we started to see some signs with this with the April data. No one's quite sure if this is going to be sustained or if it's going to be that big, but you can sort of see what the actual stats look like. So the blue line over here is rate of change versus 12 months ago. Historically, CPI numbers for all products, all goods and services. The green line is just food away from home, and the pink line is food at home. So, massive spikes in the price of food at home as we got into the pandemic, as you can imagine. I don't know if they have a line just for toilet paper. That would have been interesting to see have that one. And you can see that we're starting to have a little bit of acceleration over here in that overall inflation number, that blue line. But it is instructive to make sure we understand the time scales we're looking at. So this is over the last 2 years, right? From January 2019 to today. If we pull this back a little bit further and go to January 2015 to today, you can see some more severe spikes and dips. And if you could pull back even further and go back to like the 70s, you could see that the upticks that we have, while significant by today's standards, are nothing like the crazy spikes that we had going back to the 70s, where food at home prices, jumped over 20% in some months versus a year ago. And overall inflation was in the double digits and the teens in a number of those years. So certainly something to keep a monitor on, but I think the news is going to do a pretty good job of that for us. That said, 80% of consumers say they are concerned with inflation, and 82% say they are seeing signs of rising prices. Whether or not this means that they will just automatically accept all of them remains to be seen. But know that people are looking for this. So I think if you're in that 5% price range area, maybe no one notices or just sort of says it's okay, but they are more acutely aware and looking for these types of things than before. So if you start jumping at 15, 20% price increases, that's a lot. people will almost certainly notice it because they have a heightened awareness of it these days. And if inflation hits, this is where consumers most say they plan on cutting back. Live entertainment is number one, restaurant meals is number two, travel is number three. You could actually argue that all three of those top spots are sort of food service related types of items, but specifically
Absolutely,
restaurant meals right at the top. So let's keep a close eye on this and know that the food service business may be particularly sensitive if inflation becomes a major concern. We don't know yet if it will be, but let's keep an eye on it. With that, we're a minute over. Have a fantastic long holiday weekend. We thank you again for spending time with us. Mark, Mike, seriously, big thank you. I'm gonna go find myself a cicada to eat and invite you all to come back June 10th. We're gonna have brand new information, including a look at actually traffic and what's going on and where people are going in some pretty extraordinary detail. And if you aren't working with us yet, by all means, just email us hello@datassential.com. If you are, we're glad that you are, and we invite you to work with us even a little bit more.